Good morning. Happy Friday to everybody. I hope you are having a good and productive week. Geez, there are so many things going on in the news that it's hard to keep track of it all. Sorry about that. My head is too big. Um, I guess most of you watched the State of the Union speech Tuesday night that wasn't really a State of the Union speech. It was more of it's supposed to be his first press conference, but it sure did sound like a State of the Union speech. Overall, I would give him a 9 out of 10 of it. Although there are some things that he said that you're just kind of like, what? Um, he was pretty good about keeping on point, and you could tell he had some people helping him a little bit with what to say. But he talked for about an hour and 40 minutes, and it didn't seem like that long. It went by very quickly. I streamed it live and I was watching it and I thought, wow, he didn't really do any major gaffes. But there were two things that I really had an issue with him on that. Uh, One of them he said about making mice transgender. The government was spending money, but it wasn't transgender. They were doing something transgenic. It was having to do with genes from another species of mouse. I think they were trying to get the mice to grow bigger and grow hair like a woolly mammoth or something like that. It was pretty bizarre, but he said transgender mice. That The government shouldn't be spending money on transgenic mice either, but nevertheless, that was kind of weird when he said that. And I did think it was funny when he talked about the waste of things, where he said, and nobody knows what that is. He would mention, we're doing this for uh, transgender studies in the African nation of Lesotho. And he said, most of you don't know where that is. He was actually correct about that. I only know where it was because I took a geography class in college. If I'm correct, it was a landlocked nation inside South Africa. I think the other one might be Botswana and Lesotho. I don't know, or maybe it's Swaziland. I don't remember. But nevertheless, I believe there are two countries that are landlocked inside South Africa. But I went to college back in the 80s, so the map may have changed. But nevertheless, that's getting off the point. He made a he said again, I want no tax on tips, and I want no tax um, on overtime. Well, that sounds great to the populist rhetoric of that sounds wonderful, but there are a lot of caveats with that. Um, when he says no tax on tips, let's suppose, for argument's sake, you have a waitress, and the hourly wage for servers is very low. I think in some states it's like $2.85 an hour or something like that. But let's just say that she gets taxed on she makes let's say she makes 60 grand a year, um, and most of her salary is in tips. So let's say she only gets a base salary of 20 grand a year, and her tips are 40 grand, so she makes 60 grand a year. Her kitchen manager is just paid salary or paid by the hour, and he makes 60 grand a year. Okay, they're going to be taxed differently even though they make the same amount of money. I have an issue with that because it's inconsistent and it's unfair. So the kitchen manager is going to get taxed on his full 60 grand. She's going to get taxed on 20 grand. So she's going to pay much less in FICA taxes as well as other income taxes. When it comes time for them to retire, all of a sudden, now she should, if she saves a lot of money, she should invest that instead of putting it in Social Security. But nevertheless, he's going to be taxed higher for FICA. She's going to get taxed lower. When they both come time to retire, she's going to be all bent out of shape because she's getting Social Security checks that are a little more than half of what he's getting. Well, it's not fair. He's making more in Social Security. He doesn't need it. I'm poor. I'm a waitress. I was retired as a waitress. Well, that's because he paid more into it over the years and she paid less, so she would be entitled to get less. Well, the waitresses lobby is going to go and lobby their congressman to get an increased Social Security benefit. And that just makes the system even more insolvent than it already is. That's an issue. Another issue that might be a Pyrrhic victory is the no tax on overtime. Suppose you have a guy who works in a warehouse. He drives a forklift, he loads trucks, inventory specialist, whatever. Let's say he's making a salary of 60 grand a year. Okay. But let's say he's been there a long time. He knows several different jobs in there. So they're shorthanded. So they always have him working overtime. Let's say he makes 40 grand in overtime, which is not really hard to do. If you work 15 hours a week of overtime, you're going to come close to that. Let's say he works almost 60 hours a week, and he comes close to $100,000 a year for his net salary. Okay, including wages, regular wages, and time and a half at 1.5 the hourly rate. He comes up with 100 grand. Let's say the warehouse manager is salaried and makes, including his bonus, makes 100 grand. Okay, and he doesn't work 60 hours a week, but let's just say for argument's sake, they both make 100 grand. The warehouse manager is going to be taxed on the full amount. The guy in the warehouse, the forklift operator, is only going to pay tax on 60 grand under Trump's plan, provided he can get it through Congress. So you're going to have the same fundamental issue of fairness. Here's a guy who's a manager who's probably, went to college, has time in the business and whatnot. So he's getting taxed on the full bill. The guy driving the forklift, and there's nothing wrong with driving a forklift. It is a skill. You could say that about the maintenance mechanic in the warehouse, the truck driver, or whatever. Making the time and a half overtime. So now they're getting taxed on a lower amount. But you're going to have the Social Security issue again when those people retire because they pay less into FICA. They're going to get less benefits. Now, personally, I'd rather be the hourly worker, get taxed on lower amount. I will invest what I would have paid with FICA. I would invest it in my retirement fund, so I would have more money when I retired. But most people really aren't going to do that because your kid needs braces, your wife wants to go to the Bahamas, your son wants a car for graduation. Things come up. If you don't have it taken out of your check and invested, it's not going to work for you. I learned that the hard way. I'm retired now, but I never did anything for retirement till I turned 30. And then it was like a light went off. And then I started participating in my company's plan. I put as much as I could. I did that for several years and it paid off. But generally, if I hadn't had it taken out before I got it in my check, it would have been spent. I would have, bought new tires, nice wheels for the truck or something like that. But nevertheless, I'm getting off track. But you have an issue where those people are going to be getting less from Social Security and they're going to feel like they're getting screwed. So they're going to be writing to their congressman. They're going to lobby through AARP or whatever to get more money handed down to them. And that's an issue. Some of what Trump does, some of it is like, okay, I understand where he's coming from. I understand why he wants to do that. You look at this DOGE thing, okay? It's kind of like there are certain things where he needs to use. Now one of my cats is back there. Just ignore her. But um, the preferred instrument would be a scalpel, and Donald Trump is using a sledgehammer or a chainsaw. I think that this thing about federal employees getting laid off that can be an issue, and it seems like they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think what they should have done is gone through a complete audit of every federal agency before they talk about cutting anything. Go through every federal agency, make a spreadsheet, put it online for the American taxpayers to see because it is our money. There's no such thing as federal money. It's our money. We're taxpayers. Put everything out there as a spreadsheet and then come up to the people and say, I went through it. Elon and I went through this. We looked at it. It was really, really bad. We had to do some cuts, the best cuts, the biggest cuts ever. Something like that in his little manner of speaking. Bring it out and say, this is what we think is wrong. And, we're going to audit every federal agency, including the Pentagon and the Federal Reserve System, which is not federal. They have no reserves, but it is a system. Those are the things where, and then go through the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 lists 18 enumerated powers. Go in there and say, okay, what federal agency is outside of that? Okay. Department of Education, get rid of it, phase it out. That is a state function. Department of Agriculture, get rid of it. I know they run the food stamp program, which is also unconstitutional at the federal level, but the federal Department of Agriculture doesn't help any farmers grow any crops. Every state already has that. Like they have a state Department of Education. Housing and Urban Development, not a federal responsibility. Get rid of it. That's a state function. The federal government should not be paying for a housing project in Springfield, Illinois. Okay. That's up to the taxpayers of that state and that city. You don't want the federal government messing with things like that, because with federal money comes federal strings, as we've all learned the hard way throughout many, many years as living as citizens in our great country. But National Public Radio, National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, all that stuff is not really constitutional, and I would argue it's not necessary. PBS, Big Bird and Elmo and Kermit the Frog and all that, they can make plenty of money. It's just something that's not really needed. You know, now the Federal Communications Commission, you could argue that's necessary because radio and TV signals cross state lines, satellite transmissions cross state lines. Department of Transportation, yes, you've got trucks, tractors, interstate highways, things like that. That's constitutional. But there are a lot of federal agencies. Department of Commerce, do you really need that? Federal Trade Commission, yes, because you have to, that helps fight fraud. But there are a lot of other things they can cut. Should the federal government be involved in your school lunch program? No. Should a senator from New Jersey be able to tell the people in Iowa what their speed limit should be? No. Should a member of Congress from New York State tell New Mexico how they have to structure their law enforcement? No, not at all. You know, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution is way overused. It's stretched so far that you could drive a big rig with doubles through it. Is supposed to keep commerce regular. In other words, Virginia can't set up toll booths and tariff things coming in from Kentucky, things like that. You need to keep commerce regular. That's what they meant by regulate. It doesn't mean have a little regulation for every little thing. But I don't want to get sidetracked on that. But, you know, I think that had the election gone the other way, if Harris had won in November, nobody would be talking about cutting government anywhere. They would be ramping up expenditures. They'd be increasing and expanding unconstitutional programs. The budget would be growing. The debt would be growing. The deficit would be growing even more than it is already. It would be Katie bar the door. There would be nothing that would be off the table. They'd be seeking to both expand the power of the federal government and expand the power of the executive branch. I think that it's funny to hear people saying Trump is a fascist because he wants to basically pull the lid off so people can see what's percolating in DC and cut some of that out. A fascist would try and cover it up and expand the power. So you could say he's a bully, he's a narcissist, he's crass, he's like a bull in a china shop. Yes, but fascist really isn't quite the right definition for that. A lot of people who call other people fascist are really just neo-Marxist in their own beliefs. They're probably every bit as totalitarian as Donald Trump would be, plus more. They're not mad that the president would be abusing federal power or expanding federal power. They're just mad because they're not in charge of it. So when you hear people say they're resentful of, you know, too much power in DC, no, they're not resentful of it. They're just resentful of it because they're not in charge of it. That's a problem we get into, where both parties love the power when they're in charge, but they don't want the other party to have it when they're out of power. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But as I have always said, if we followed the Constitution, if we at least tried to follow the Constitution, it wouldn't really matter who the president was unless we were at war. The main job of the president is the commander in chief. You know, you'd be more concerned with who your governor is and who your state legislature is. but I've gone through that before. I'm not going to revisit that today. Um, Donald Trump also said something about no taxes on Social Security. Well, a lot of these things are going to require Congress to enact legislation that he's going to have to sign. He can't just do everything by executive order. And some of these people who support Trump say, oh, well, if he doesn't do it, nobody will do it. We have to give him that power. He's doing it for the right reason. Well, it's easy to say that, but when you let one president rule by executive order, you set a precedent, not a president, you set a precedent with a C for the next administration to say, well, the previous one did it. Then you go down the whataboutism road. Well, Trump is doing this. Well, Biden did that. Well, Obama did that. Well, Trump did that his first time. And then you just gaslight each other, and everybody yells and screams at each other, and we don't get anywhere. But we do certainly live in some interesting times. I think that sometimes I really want to trust that Donald Trump is trying to do the right thing. Um, on one day he'll do something and you'll be like, yeah, that was really good. And then the next day he does something totally cringeworthy, and you just feel like that like you've got a red laser burning in your forehead when he gets up and speaks, and you're like, oh no. Well, that's sort of the way it is. The stock market has tumbled a bit in the last couple of days. And last I checked, the Dow was still above 42. So if the Dow stays above 40,000 for a while, I think there's a chance it's going to eventually go higher. What people don't like is uncertainty. Well, we're going to put a tariff on this today. Well, we're going to take a tariff off this tomorrow. Well, we're going to put a tariff on this tomorrow. Oh, no, we're going to wait 30 days. That doesn't really do. I understand that maybe it makes Trump think like he's more powerful than he really is. I don't know, but markets do not like uncertainty. Big companies don't like uncertainty. You can't go to Honda or Nissan or Toyota or Mitsubishi and say, well, we're going to tariff your stuff if you build it in Mexico, or you build a factory in Mexico, or you import it from Japan. We're going to tariff you, but we're not going to tariff you if you put it here. Well, you can't take a company like Honda and just say, okay, well, we're going to close our plants in Mexico and we're going to open new ones in the United States. That doesn't just turn on a dime. It's not like opening a convenience store in the corner. Okay. You're talking about millions, tens of millions, maybe even billions of dollars in production, buying the land, the rights of way, the easements, the utilities, the equipment. Then you've got to hire employees. Then you need the infrastructure around it. You can't just change like that overnight. And then what if Honda or Nissan or Toyota says, you know what? This is a really good idea. We're going to build all our stuff in the United States. Chevrolet says, we're not going to build our pickup truck in Mexico anymore. We're going to build them in America again. And I used to have a Silverado. It was built in Canada. Very well built truck. But nevertheless, you say, okay, well, we're gonna move the factory to the United States. Well, then what happens in 2026 if the Democrats win, and then they win the Congress and the Senate, and they decide to impeach and remove Trump? Well, then you get a President Vance. But now all the stuff that these companies did, they try to turn on a dime. Well, then the Democrats win in 2028, and then get rid of everything Trump did. Well, now can you expect Honda or Toyota to move factories? And that in itself is going to take a number of years to move that production. Are there factories they built in Mexico supposed to just be a sunk cost? I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, and it doesn't just turn on a dime. And as for tariffs, they keep talking about Trump's trade war, Trump's tariffs, and to a certain extent, that's true. But these other countries are already tariffing us. What he's doing is kind of a reciprocal to tariffs they already have against us that are unfair. Many nations tariff the US products. In Germany, for instance, if you want to buy an American car, they might not say call it a tariff, but they're going to VAT, a value added tax. They're going to VAT the hell of it when they sell it to the customer. So it's a de facto tariff, even if they don't call it a tariff. It's an extra cost. That's why you don't see a lot of Chevrolets running around in Germany. You see a few, but you don't see very many. You see a Ford Mustang or a Dodge Challenger once in a while. Germans love those cars. Now, most Germans don't like an ordinary American car, like maybe a Chevy Malibu or, a Ford Taurus or something like that. But the Germans do love American muscle cars. I hardly ever saw any American pickup trucks over there except ones that were owned by servicemen. And the reality is because fuel is so expensive over there and parking is too tight. I have a an old, a 21-year-old Ford F-150 extended cab long bed, and it would be too big to park in most places in Germany, at least with a parallel parking on the street anyway. Um, and it only gets 14 miles to the gallon, so it would not be good to own one over there. But it's my knockaround truck here. It's not my daily driver, so I don't drive it that much. So the gas really doesn't hurt. But if I had to rely on it all the time, it would be expensive. But nevertheless, there's other trade policies that it still puts us at a disadvantage. And I think Donald Trump is trying to correct that. But the reality of it is when you put a tariff on something coming from Mexico or something coming from Canada, it's a tax on us, the American people. Um, so if they put a 25% tariff on Mexican tortillas or Canadian Crown Royal whiskey, which that's my favorite. I love Crown Royal. Love me some Crown Royal. You put a 25% tariff on that, it doesn't hurt the Canadians, it hurts me. So that might be incentive for me to say, okay, well, I'll drink some Kentucky bourbon without a tariff. Okay, fine, I get that. But then when Canada will turn around and say, well, we're going to put a tax on Vermont maple syrup, or we're going to put a tax on American refrigerators, assuming they buy refrigerators from the United States, then that disincentivizes Canadians from buying American products. And it's like you and I are sitting in a boat. We're in a rowboat and we're out in the middle of a lake, and you get mad at me and you shoot a hole in my side of the boat. Water starts coming in. I say, "Oh yeah, well here's to you," and I shoot a hole in your side of the boat. All that happens is we end up on the bottom of the lake together, but faster. So these tariffs, if it can be used as a negotiating tool to get somebody else to lower the tariff on us, that's fine. But unfortunately, the media are not going to portray it that way. They're going to gaslight people into thinking that Donald Trump was only interested in starting a trade war. And I don't think most people have a very good understanding of economics. And that's kind of sad, but it is what it is. But anyway, another thing that I saw was they were talking about the men playing in women's sports. I prefer to use the term males don't belong in female sports because people have twisted the definition of what is a man and what is a woman. Well, I'll just use male and female because you can do anything you want to a male. You can chop parts off, add parts on. They're not going to become a female. Likewise, a female, you can sew things on, chop things off. A female is not going to become a male. No female is going to father a child, and no male is going to give birth to a child and be pregnant. That's just biological reality. But my whole issue with it is that should be up to the states and the sanctioning bodies, not the federal government. The halls of the United States Senate are not the correct venue for having an argument over whether you think men should play in women's sports or you think men should be in the women's locker room, or males should be in the female locker room. That's beneath the Senate. They have too many other things that they need to be doing. It is telling how the vote came down on that, though. It clearly shows that the Democrats are definitely the party of misogyny. There's no other two ways to look at it. They want people who are males to be in the female locker room, and that is okay with them. But as I said, the issue should never make it to the Senate. I saw recently where a team of, I believe it was a girls' track team, and they just said, nope, we're not playing against boys. And they boycotted and they forfeited. I think it's going to take a lot of brave young women standing up for themselves and saying, nah, we're not going to do that. Not in contact, not in physical sports. We're not going to do it. And other countries are waking up to that and realizing that the whole thing was crazy from the start. But people say, well, you're transphobic. No, I'm not transphobic. I don't care. If you're a dude and you want to grow your hair out and get long fingernails and get fake boobs, knock yourself out. Okay. That, I don't think any harm should come to you. And if I saw somebody assaulting you, I would stand up and say, no, you're not going to do that. I would stand up and I would fight for you not to be a victim of assault. I believe that people should live their life as they see fit. But just because you see yourself as a woman or you identify as a woman, it doesn't make it so. But I don't think any harm should come to you for it. I understand people feel they are born in the wrong body. I have two people in my extended family by marriage, not by blood. I have two boys who are well over the age of 18 now who have gender dysphoria. And it's very real. At least it's very real to them. Other people might not think it's real, but it does exist. But do I think they should be able to play athletic sports against girls? No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. And you can hate on me if you want. I don't care. It's okay. I don't have a dog in that fight, but the sanctioning bodies and the states and the school people besides the federal government need to figure out what they're going to do here. Now, of course, the fly in the ointment is the federal funding. Well, there's another constitutional issue. There should not be federal funding for athletics or education. That's unconstitutional. There shouldn't be federal funding for a university because education is not an enumerated power of the federal government. The 10th Amendment reserves that to the states because it's not enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. So, see, there you have the people in Maine are like, well, we want to have boys and girls sports. And Donald Trump was like, no, I'm going to withhold your federal funding. Well, they shouldn't have that. It's the same thing with sanctuary cities. Well, we're going to cut off their federal funding. There shouldn't be federal funding. The city of Boston should not be getting federal funding to run its police force. Okay. I can understand a certain amount of federal funding for an interstate highway or possibly a bridge that might cross a state line. Yes. But other than that, jurisdictional taxation. If the people in Boston and the citizens of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts wish to have this jackwagon stuff going on and they can fund it with their own taxes, then God bless you, knock yourself out. But somebody like Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren should not be able to go to the federal treasury and appropriate money for her state to fund things that are unconstitutional. Just like my senators, I didn't vote for him, but Tim Kaine and Mark Warner shouldn't be able to go to the citizens of New Jersey and Illinois and appropriate federal funds for an art museum in the city of Richmond. Okay. That's our whole problem, that we've got this thing where like federal money is just something that is just, it grows on trees somewhere. There was a story on one of our local news stations. This had to be at least 10 years ago when I still watched TV, but they're talking about improving an intersection in Richmond. I think they made it a roundabout and put in a wider turn lane and made a traffic signal there. And they said, yeah, and the improvement, it didn't cost taxpayers any money because it was covered under a federal grant. And I'm just like, oh, cringe. That's like when you see a headline in the newspaper and it says a man was fatally shot to death. You're like, what? It's just, the media, everything just seems to be out of whack. But nevertheless, I'm getting carried away. I'm like a squirrel on cappuccino this morning. My attention span is about the same as a gnat right now. It's just Friday and it's been kind of a crazy week. But I just wanted to run a few things out there. I see that people are arguing over stuff that it's like they're arguing the wrong place. Um, it'd be like going into a bingo parlor at a church where there's a bunch of old ladies playing bingo, and then you're arguing about, you know, uh, which team should have won the Super Bowl or the plays used in a hockey game or something like that. It's just not the right venue for it. Um, I think that too many people have been conditioned to believe that the president is like an imperial power or something. And you look at the situation with Ukraine, okay, and Zelensky, and that could be a whole different discussion for itself. But it seems like nowadays, if so many people I see with the support Ukraine and Zelensky patriot and all this stuff, it doesn't seem like they really love Ukraine. They just hate Donald Trump, and they perceive that Donald Trump is against Ukraine, which he's really not. He wants to find a way to end this meat grinder of a war. But it's like if you support Trump, well, you're a Putin puppet. Really? Yeah. But it seems like people have dug in that, like, if Donald Trump came out tomorrow and said, I want to give Ukraine everything, I want to put 2 divisions of US troops on the ground, I want to use the United States military to kick Putin out of Crimea, and he wanted to go to war, then all of a sudden the Democrats would be lobbying to make Russia the 51st state. They would be opposed to the idea just because Trump came up with it. And of course, there are their Republican cousins who would do the same thing. If Obama proposes something, tighter border restrictions, and deportations, then the Republicans will be like, well, no, I'm not going to support that just because Obama did it. Same thing with Joe Biden. So it happens on both sides of the aisle. That's why I cannot, in good conscience, be part of either of the political parties. I'm a libertarian-ish independent. I, I sort of on most personal issues I lean conservative, but I can't get down with a lot of the stuff that the Republican Party does because they still largely favor bigger government. They're kind of like, well, we can manage this federal program better than the Democrats. And I'm out here like, well, wait a minute, that shouldn't be a federal program. I realize I'm in a small committee. I'm in a group of very few people, and that's okay. I've got I've got friends who are to the left of Bernie Sanders, and I've got people I know who are to the right of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun. And I probably learned something from either of them. I love hearing other people's perspectives. I just, in these days, before we're in this soundbite mentality where as soon as somebody says something, well, I'm against it because he's a Democrat, or I'm against it because he's a Republican. We got to get out of that mindset. And I think that's doing us a disservice as a country. But nevertheless, I just, you know, if I could get an elevator pitch with Donald Trump, I would just say, look, put this stuff, gather all the information, audit the books, put everything out there, put it online so people can read it. That shouldn't be that hard to do that. You've got high tech people. Let the American taxpayers look through it, see where our money is being wasted, and then come out with a way of saying we need to cut this and cut this and cut this and cut this. And don't try and do it all yourself. Get Congress involved. Use what's called a rescission. They can do that. And then you sign the legislation and it's done. It's totally constitutional as well. But, when you spend life fighting tyrants, you got to be careful that you don't become one, Mr. President. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, I wish everybody has a very good day and enjoy your weekend. It looks like I'm waiting to see if it's going to get warm enough. I needed to stain the rear deck today, but it's got to get up between 55 and 60 degrees, and it's not there yet. So, peace to everybody and have a good day. And I will leave you with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Most any man can handle adversity, but to really test his character, give him power.